Okay, everyone, I'm just going to finish this video quickly, just give you a sense of this very last question. Let's just take a look at the question again. This is the very last part of the question, the most complicated part. We now have this supply and demand graph where the supply curve is vertical because there is a fixed quantity. We have graphing consumer and producer surplus, so you can see what that looks like. Here, this is without any price ceiling with the equilibrium price at $800 for an apartment, 1,200 apartments offered. You can see the consumer surplus that's shaded. The producer surplus is at the price of 800, but because the supply curve is vertical, we're going to get this shape essentially, that is more of a cube than it is a square or a rectangle instead of the shape of a triangle. So just kind of calculate, you can use, the area of a rectangle or whatever to get the, the producer surplus, okay? And any transactions that would include a quantity greater than 1,200, can't be made in this market. So we're seeing at the price of $800, every single apartment of the 1,200 that gets sold, that some people are still willing to pay $800. Some producers, this price here, we're really looking at producers at this quantity of $1,200, wanting to supply that at the price of $800. Okay, we don't have an upward sloping supply curve in this case. The other question, which is what happens now with this situation if we put a price ceiling or a price floor, in this case, it's a price ceiling, what happens? And this is, where rent control comes in. It's a very common price ceiling. Basically, let's see if we can lower the price of the apartment, mandate that instead of $800, everybody who's selling an apartment as a supplier now has to offer it at $600. Well, what has happened, right? And this is where we can use the concepts of consumer surplus and producer surplus. We do get a sense, first of all, the equilibrium quantity is now going to be the same, okay, because there's a fixed set of apartments, right? And when we lower the price to $600, we know that there is going to be a quantity demand that's greater than 1,200. There's 1,200 apartments, the supply is fixed, but at a price of 600, the quantity demanded is no longer 1,200. It's going to be greater than 1,200. We could go back up to our schedule to see exactly what the quantity demanded is, but we know that it's greater than 1,200. So we have a shortage, okay? And this is one of the issues with rent control is when lots of people are experiencing lower than the equilibrium price, it's great for those people because those people are paying a lower price for an apartment. So all of the individuals that are on this part of the demand curve, right, who are willing to pay above 800 now are paying 600. So they've increased their consumer surplus. And there is an increase in consumer surplus right here. This is the older consumer surplus had the price of 800. Now we're down to the price of 600. So there's a much larger dollar amount when it comes to consumer surplus. Even more consumers are going to be better off, not because we have more consumers, but in this case, we have consumers who are paying $200 less for an apartment. So all 1,200 apartments, are going for $200 less. Of course, producer surplus is going to be smaller. So consumer surplus increases, producer surplus decreases because producers are not better off. They are offering the exact same amount of apartments, but at a price of $600 instead of $800, right? So they are decisively not better off. And we don't necessarily have a big difference in the total consumer surplus. So if we look at the total surplus, that may be similar, but we actually, because we don't see a difference in the quantity, we do have a change in the consumer surplus versus the producer surplus. So who benefits from the price control is very, very vivid and clear to us. We can see that it is the consumers who are in this market. We also, however, can see that the lower the price, the greater the quantity demanded is, and that we have, as a result, a shortage of apartments, at least in the immediate term. Maybe in the long term, more apartments could be built, but right now, let's assume that that can't easily happen. The other and last question here is what happens to deadweight loss? Deadweight loss will stay the same. Before, there was no deadweight loss. We had an equilibrium. In this case, because the quantity of apartments that's being bought and sold is still 1,200, we are actually at the allocatively efficient quantity. The price ceiling doesn't change the allocatively efficient quantity of 1,200, and the price ceiling still produces that same quantity. Okay, so we don't have a change in the quantity. That's like allocative efficiency is connected to, are we producing the quantity that society wants? Is the market allocating apartments in the right way? So even though the $600 price, we see a shortage and it's problematic, we don't actually have any change in the actual quantity of apartments that would be transacted. Okay, so deadweight loss is non-existent in this model also. Okay, I hope that helps. I will see you tomorrow.